This is Dr. Bob Greenberg, and this is the Break It Down Show.
And now, the Break It Down Show with Jon and Pete.
I don't like to say such things in someone's dining room, but I might have a boner.
Me too.
Yeah.
There's no stopping Tan Maria.
That's the name of her dick.
Uh-huh.
Because she tans it.
Because, yeah, clearly.
I was in New Orleans, and we got a chance to talk to Chris Thomas King. He played Tommy Johnson, the guy that sold his soul at the Crossroads in 1892. He played him in Oh Brother Where Art. Yeah. And so he's the guy that plays the guitar, second generation blues man. And he exploded our brains. And he said, basically, he's like, there is no such thing as jazz. It's all blues. And the blues
He uttered these words on Bourbon Street.
And he said blues started in New Orleans because no one in the Mississippi or down in the bayou is ever going to dress like Rod Stewart and survive to tell about it. That only happened here. He said that.
He said about New Orleans, we invented Saturday night.
Yeah.
He's sounding more and more like Putin every second. Yes, and then we the great Russian people invented the automobile, and then we invented gasoline.
Yeah. It was a fantastic show and just incredible. And then he had a lot of compelling things to talk about. He's like, trust me, there's no such thing as jazz. It's all blues. And the thing that really kind of twisted it is, we're looking at blues as...
He was being inclusive.
Yeah.
Is what he was doing.
You know what? Listen, this is the era of alternative truth.
Uh-huh.
We alternative fact. Gosh knows that everything goes.
Uh-huh.
He said that, when we talk about blue, it's not the French blue and blue entertainment and expressing yourself, which is what New Orleans is about. And that all that stuff comes from there. So it was a fantastic conversation. I knew it was something that I would want to bring up with you because you're the lexicon on this show.
Well, I hate, and I hate to disagree with any practitioner, especially one who appeared in one of my favorite Coen Brothers movies of all freaking time. The music in that movie was just
so fantastic.
Fantastic.
Sublime.
Exactly. I love, that's a great movie. Look, it's the Foggy Bottom Boys.
It ain't my constituency.
right. Look, let's not get verifiable truths in the way. This guy's speaking emotionally as a practitioner on site. Yeah. We're going to leave it alone. I'm going to leave it alone.
Just to introduce the show, we were back in the lovely abode of Dr. Bob Greenberg, who is serving us martini. And I know I'm going to speak for Pete here. We just love you, man. We just love everything about you. The emotions that come over us when we are just planning to come over here. We know that we're going to get our minds blown somehow. We know that some little nugget of truth.
Shut them up.
No, leave it.
It's fine.
Yeah. Really, I appreciate that you're considerate of that. But this is a live environment show. Hey, there's Daniel.
Yes, it is.
There he is.
Yeah.
What's going on? You going to go to Pelican Bay later on? No.
No, we hope not. A bath and piano lesson will be enough.
Yes.
I like that Dr. Bob gives the hand signal for let's keep it down.
Yeah.
And then Pete asks him a question.
I'm the good influence uncle.
The other recent show thing that happened for us is that we had a guest on named Dan Stone. And Dan Stone is the publisher of Radio Silence, which is a publication that is more than it's a periodical. He essentially publishes a book every 3 months.
Wow.
It's the size of a book. It feels like a book. It smells like a book. It's got no advertisement in it. It has actual literature. And he's focused on literature and rock and roll. And, of course, the intersection of literature about rock and roll. And it's magnificent. He's here in Oakland, and we tried to drag him up here, but he's going to have a baby like any minute.
Sounds like, yeah.
So,
and that's unusual for a guy. I mean, usually it would be his wife.
Yeah.
And,
but we're inclusive.
It could hurt. It could hurt.
That's right.
Here in Oakland, anything can happen.
Anything. That's right.
You know, what happens in Oaktown goes out over the world, right?
Maybe he's built up a thick skin.
I don't think so.
Yeah. I'm overwhelmed by Dr. Bobness in this house.
Excuse me. I've never heard it phrased quite that way. Thank you, Jon.
The other thing that we wanted to do, we are mourning the loss of the elder, Mr. Turner. Pete's dad passed away just a few days ago, and we wanted to somehow properly pay tribute to him on the show. And we figured that because he had dual degrees in music and divinity, that made him a wildly interesting character, and it made him somebody whose proper tribute would happen somehow here. When a guy has those two disciplines in his education, and then ends up, he retired as a civil servant, having worked for the Department of Transportation, and he made it so that his passions were outside of the way that he actually earned his living.
Which, by the way, is a really good idea.
Yeah, a lot of
You know, you don't learn to hate the thing that you initially loved because it doesn't give you a living.
He was able to be joyful about both things all the way to the end. And a lot of the folks we have seen get worn down by choosing to make a living with their passions and then understanding that their passions disappointed their prospects for making the type of living they wanted to make.
Mm-hmm.
Boy, is there a lot of that.
I've taken to saying, and I'm not happy about saying this at my age, but to me, a lot of life is just disappointment management. Mm-hmm. Isn't that terrible to say? Because we don't like being disappointed. And I became a musician because it's what I loved, and I believed in it, and I still love it and believe in it some of the time.
It's been pretty good to you as well.
It's been pretty good because I've been very lucky. But in many ways, the big moments you hope for, let's just say we all live in a world of envy. There's very little to go around. One has to learn to manage disappointment after a certain amount of time. I suppose that's true with everybody, frankly.
Yeah, I think about my dad's life, and he did a lot. And like almost all the musicians we talked to, he realized early on that he was going to be a musician. And his folks were like, okay, we'll support this. We'll see where it goes. And it never stopped. He played the organ, the piano, he played the tuba, played the accordion. I mean, he could play a lot of different things. He was a musician.
He made music.
Yeah, he made
out
music.
Of things.
And he led music. He did all kinds of things. And I bet if you would have asked 20-year-old Bob and you said, the rest of your life, you're going to make music. You're going to teach people about music. You're going to guide people towards music. Is that good enough? You take that deal.
Oh, I would have been thrilled to know that. And I am. Without getting too heavy about all of this right now, our priorities do change as we get older. And when we become parents and we have the responsibility of not just taking care of ourselves, but the larger responsibility of your mate and your children, you no longer are as free to dismiss the fact that what you're doing does not necessarily make a lot of money or does not necessarily this or that, or that you have to work 70 hours a week, which is my gig. Because as a self-employed person, that's what I have to do.
Right. 70 hours a week so that nobody can tell you, damn it, to work 40.
It's more or less exactly the right thing. It's just that I've become constitutionally incapable of taking instruction from anybody. And that means I've been working for myself for too long. I have a rotten boss, and he's just, always on my
taskmaster.
Oh, man.
He is a cantankerous old bat.
But anyway, all I'm saying is that as we get older, our circumstances of our life change in ways that we could never have anticipated when we were younger. And that's part of the process. It's inevitable. It has to be that way. It could not be that way. If every 19-year-old had the mind of a 60-year-old, that 19-year-old would never take a single risk in his or her life.
Right.
And that would be the world's biggest disaster.
Yeah.
Because this planet is run on the passion of younger people. That's what makes it all work.
It's very interesting that you say that, because it's one of the things that attracts venture capitalists, for instance, to the Silicon Valley, because they get these guys who are, of course, brilliant and get full ride scholarships to, Columbia and Yale, and decide to chuck them in favor of coming out here and doing some crazy harebrained scheme while wearing tennis shoes like a pirate. And you're right. The large brass that it takes to make a move that idiotic and brilliant is something that really only exists in young people and older people who have been that young person.
And I think you're right. If you no longer are responsible for your children, if you're not worried about, paying off the house because it's already done, if you have time in front of you, I think that's the other beautiful thing about being younger, is that you always know that barring some terrible health disaster, you've got lots of time. You've got lots of time. Yeah. If this doesn't work, something else is going to work. If something else doesn't work, I'll figure it out. And that's exactly the right way to think. That that makes you willing to take risks that other folks are not willing to take because we don't have that kind of time. We can't afford to mess up and start all over again, even though very often that's what we have to do. So I'm not ruining my youth. I'm merely pointing out that I know things now that I didn't know then, and I knew things then that I no longer know now.
I'm going to pull it in and make it about me for just a minute. Because I want to answer this question. I recently set my drums back up. And I haven't gotten to a regimented course of study again or anything like that, but they're back up in my living room. And I was back to tinkering on them. But there was a period of time when I was very serious about playing them, and then a very long period of time when I didn't touch them at all. Years, many of them. But somehow I still identified myself as a musician.
What kind of set is it? Is it a rock set? Is it a jazz set?
Well, a little bit of both, actually. It probably looks more like a jazz set. I have a picture. I'll show you a picture of my drum set, and then you tell me what it is.
No, I can't do that. I'm not a drummer. You're the man. I'm just asking you what kind of set you think it is, because that's the kind of music you would choose to play. Oh, that's a jazz set.
Yeah.
That's not a rock set.
Never mind what I just
See,
said.
Never mind what I just said.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, that's a jazz set.
Well, I showed it to you for that reason. Yeah, it looks like a jazz set, a little cocktail set. But, Max Weinberg didn't go out with much more than that. So it just depends on what you want to play.
I mean, you
right?
look at the rock drummers now. I mean, they're sitting behind 46,000 drums, for God's sake.
Yeah.
And using only about 3 or 4 of them.
Right. Let's face it.
Yeah. Size matters, but you don't necessarily play on it. Right.
And those in the know look at that set and go, that's 4,600 pieces of... how come there's only 4 microphones?
Yeah.
But what do you think drives the lunacy that I would continue to call myself a musician for all those years when I didn't touch a musical instrument?
Let me add something to that, too, because about 2 weeks ago, you said, you ought to be playing your guitar more, Pete.
I said that to Pete.
Yeah.
I said, you ought to play your guitar more.
So not only is he wondering about his lunacy, he's also spreading his lunacy to me, because you know what I drove up here from LA with? My guitar.
Yeah.
So now I answer the lunacy question.
It's not lunacy at all, guys. I mean, first of all, I would say that the things that we do in our youth and the self-images we create when we're young stick with us for the rest of our lives. If you have a self-image of yourself as a drummer, as a guitarist, then you're a drummer and you're a guitarist. You can always get back to it. It's like riding a bike. The muscle memory does come back. I mean, I stopped playing piano more or less for about 10 years. I mean, I would fool around when someone asked me to play some stuff. But I got back to it seriously about 7 years ago. I'm still not practicing the way I should. If I had the time, I'd play 2 or 3 hours a day. But I don't. But I never stopped thinking about myself as a piano player because it's just essential to my personality. It's part of the way I look at the world and look at myself.
That's it.
So it's part of who you are. And you got to remember, playing an instrument, making music, this is something we're hardwired to do. It's part of the way we organize the infinite chaos around us and storytell and make it sensical. By making music, by writing stories, by speaking, by singing, we organize information and create in some way a way to understand the narrative of our lives. So you can't not, if you've been a musician, you're always a musician because you're organizing information based on the way you used to play.
That's
absolutely true.
Absolutely. I'm thinking about Krista Vernoff. Krista Vernoff was an executive producer for Grey's Anatomy and head writer, and also same thing for the show called Shameless. And she absolutely is a world-class drama TV writer and can get any job she wants. You know what she wants to do?
What's that?
Play rock and roll.
Good for her.
Be a singer. She did like the cruise ship singing and waiting. And
crazy. She's
got a friend and they go down in his basement every now and then and they just make bad music. But for them, it doesn't matter if it's bad. It's just them doing what they want. They're being kids.
But it's also how you perceive the world.
That's right. Exactly what you said.
It's exactly, you're filtering this. So you never stopped being a drummer. I mean, you might not be drumming,
right,
but the tools that allowed you to hear the world through your drums are still part and parcel of who you are and always will be.
Yeah.
Which is just yet another reason why everyone should, if it's in any way possible, should learn to play an instrument at some part of their lives.
Yeah.
Especially when you're young, because the brain development, the way of perceiving the world, it's like learning a second language.
Right.
It is.
It gives you tools that you carry with you forever and ever.
Yeah. In that way, it's like learning a second language, but I think it goes deeper still, because you're right. I organize the world like I organize a song, or attach the parts, the moving parts of something. Mm-hmm. I have capacity for series of moving parts, because I know that my right hand is going to provide dotted eighth notes while my left foot does something else and my right foot does something else. But it all goes together.
You
and
also
that's
know
the way you see the world.
You also know as a drummer what it's like to have to support the environment around you, but the environment around you cannot do without the temporal spacing that you're providing. Mm-hmm. You perceive the different levels and layers in a performance.
Understand how to encourage them.
And you understand how, this is how life is as well. How to push things forward, because that's what drummers do.
Yeah.
They keep everything in control and in check. I mean, a drummer is to a band what a catcher is to a baseball team. Sure. It's the person behind the plate that's really calling the shots.
Who can see the whole field.
Correct. You can see the whole field.
There's a reason there's a drum riser. You're right. We are the catcher. We're calling the game.
No, I've always felt that way. And in the jazz world and the rock world, it's the drummer who, in many ways, is running the show, despite the fact that it's the lead guitarist who would like to claim that he or she is leading the show. But the bottom line is, you're the one who sees the game. And this is one of the ways you organize your life through your experience on that instrument. Mm-hmm. And I get that. I see that all the time. It's amazing. You meet people who have dedicated their lives to different instruments, how their worldview has been so shaped by the nature of their instrument.
Can you give an example of that?
Absolutely. I was married to a wonderful flute player who passed away, but she was a conservatory-trained professional class flute and piccolo player. Well, she saw life at the very top. She was always playing the highest notes in the orchestra. You know, it's funny, when we used to go to the San Francisco Symphony, as a piano player, I hear everything and I'm noticing everything, because that's what piano players do. That's why most conductors are piano players, because they're used to hearing foreground, middle ground, background. What did she listen for? She's always listening to the flute. Her worldview was filtered through the highest sounds. And she was an optimist. I'm not saying all flute players are optimists, but I am saying that there are certain stereotypes that hold true. Bass players. Yeah. Easier to say for the orchestra. Orchestra has maybe just 4 or 8 bass players. They're the only instruments in the orchestra that are not facing the audience. The bass players are on the side facing the rest of the orchestra, because the orchestra has to tune to the bass. No matter what you're playing, you have to be in tune with the bass. Mm-hmm. So the bass players are playing to the orchestra, and the orchestra is tuning to that fundamental pitch. Now, the bass players are not fancy people. They're not used to being out in front. They're not used to being noticed. They are the ultimate support crew. They're the ultimate people. I mean, I still remember when my daughter, who's 30 now, went off to Cazadero music camp. And my wife said, can you give her some advice? I mean, she was a teenager. She's going to music camp. So the best advice I could give her was, if you got to go out with someone, go out with a bass player. Because they're the best people. Yeah. They're solid. They're cool.
Solid.
They're not flashy.
That guy's going to be a provider.
Exactly.
He's thoughtful.
They're big people usually, because, they got to reach around these big instruments. Uh-huh. But, I found that this is true in jazz. It's true in rock and roll, where they're carrying a solid body bass. Bass players are different kind of people. Flute players are different kind of people.
Do you think that's why we've had so many bass players on our show, Pete? We've had a disproportionate number of bass players on our show.
I'm trying to get us some more drummers. Yeah. We're catching up.
We're catching them up, but it's true that we've had our very first guest, episode 1, was James Early, bass player.
Yeah.
And several have followed.
Yeah.
They're like the drummers too. They're providing foundation. They're taking care of everybody else. They're following and providing all at the same time. It's a very interesting job, you know. The rest of us get
It
to
is a
skim
job
the
with a
surface.
great dynamic.
Yeah.
I will say this as well. We recently lost Miguel Ferrer, and he was an actor.
Right.
But our friend Daryl Chan, who is a stuntman, knew him quite well. Daryl makes his living as a stuntman, but is also a trumpeter. So he pointed out, though, that Miguel, he was known as Miggy among his friends, was a drummer. And as soon as he said it, I went,
really?
Yeah, of course he was.
I have to say, you know, of all the roles he played, it was RoboCop.
Uh-huh.
The bad young executive in RoboCop.
Yeah.
Oh, and how he gets off in RoboCop is just so
Delicious.
Well, with the two girls and the cocaine, and it's just
I can't think.
he
of
was
how
just so bad.
Yeah, he plays a '80s cocaine-addled. He could play that forever and always be right. You know.
Yeah, you could insert that character in practically anything.
Yeah, really, exactly. It's a Shakespearean
Right.
kind of character. Yes.
I want to go back. You talked about how keyboard piano players are often the conductors, and I believe this is true. My dad, same thing. He conducted, and I remember him. So I was trying to learn about like you swing your arm. I'm a kid, you know, trying to learn about like you've got the stick in one hand, why not in the other? What's the other hand doing? Why does this guy do? You know, he's giving us all that stuff, and he would talk about people. Like his job would be to look at the piccolo player and be like, "Hey, you're way the fuck over here. I need you to, you know," and just talking to them with his hands and looking at everything. Why is it that the piano player or the person that plays keys gets up front more often than anybody else, you think?
I think there's a couple of reasons. First of all, is the first one I mentioned before. If you're a piano player, you're a bass player because you're playing a bass line.
Sure.
You're a viola player
Yeah.
because you're playing the inner voices. You're a violinist and a flute player because you're playing the upper parts as well.
Mm-hmm.
If you're a piano player, you're basically an independent. Now, if you're a flute player like my wife was, I guess she started playing in youth orchestras at the age of 8 or 9. Well, you're always playing under a conductor. If you're a violinist, a violist, even if you're in chamber groups on the side, you spend a lot of your youth playing under a conductor. Piano players don't play under conductors. Piano players have to learn from day one to make their own interpretations of the music they're playing. I'm playing a Beethoven piano sonata. I'm not following anybody but my own inner ear. So piano players not only have to hear holistically from top to bottom, inside and out, but you have to make your own aesthetic and interpretive decisions as you go. Well, that's what a conductor does, right? A conductor has to hear holistically, and a conductor has to be willing to make the decisions. Now, many times, conductors, of course, are petty autocrats, megalomaniacs at worst, who want to be in charge just because they want to be in charge. But the great conductors are almost inevitably pianists. Not always, but almost always, because they spent their lives teaching themselves to interpret and to hear holistically. It's another issue. And this is something that anyone in the military can identify with right away. I mean, you talk to some old grizzled gunnery sergeant and you say, "Gunny, why didn't you go to officer school when they gave you a chance?" "Be an officer? Those assholes? I never want to be one of those bastards."
Yeah.
All right. If you are an orchestra corps player, you're like the gunnery sergeant.
Right.
You're a high-end pro who's been doing what you do for a million years. And the one thing you have in common with the person sitting next to you is that you hate officers, meaning the conductor.
Yeah.
There's a natural ambivalence between the core of the orchestra. I don't mean the core, I mean like the CORPS, the orchestral core, and leadership, because they, it's a love-hate. All right, yes, we accept the conductor, but we empower the conductor, and the conductor forgets that. The conductor forgets that we're allowing him or her to conduct us.
Right.
The conductor, that megalomaniacal jerk, is making our lives miserable. So it is a love-hate. Sometimes more love, but often more hate. The last thing an orchestra member wants to do is go to officer school, is to become one of them. Now, it does happen sometimes. Arturo Toscanini.
I was going to ask. Yeah.
Toscanini was a cellist at La Scala, at the great Opera House in Milan.
If you ever get a chance to see anything at Teatro alla Scala, you have to do it.
And it is wonderful, and it's a great theater. And I've been lucky enough to be there a number of times.
Yeah.
And so Toscanini came out of the corps. Edo de Wart, who conducted here in San Francisco for a number of years, was an oboist.
Huh.
He came out of the corps. But it's very unusual for that to happen, only because from day one, if you've been in orchestras, you learn, I don't want to say hate, too strong a word, but not quite. You learn to be really ambivalent about conductors. Like the gunnery sergeant looking at some, scrub little first lieutenant who can't hold a candle to his experience. Most orchestral players do have mixed feelings about conductors.
It's commiserate disdain.
So I love it. So if you're a pianist, back to the original question, you're not coming from the core of the orchestra.
Right.
You're coming in from the outside. You're a pianist. You want to conduct. You start doing a little bit of it in college. You like it. Maybe you get a master's degree. And if you're really, really, really good, maybe you move on from there. So, yeah, my guess, my unscientific, random, but informed opinion is 90% of your conductors started as piano players.
Conductors also they've got to manage personalities. I know my dad, so he put on a couple of Christmas cantatas, community cantata things. So at the Catholic church, we weren't Catholic, and he would gather the pieces that he needed. I need a French horn. I need a this. I need a that. And if you're just really good at playing the French horn, it could be that you just don't have time to worry about those things. Like, I'm here to play this French horn, which is hard to play perfectly.
Right.
And someone else. And so it sounds like a guy that plays a piano who's doing all the different things, also a percussion instrument, can do so many different things with it. That makes sense that they're able to manage those things.
And they are also able to see the entire chart, and if they have questions about it, play through it. So if you are a cellist, you have a voice with a limited range. And if you really want to hear that high part for what the high part is, a pianist can execute that high part and better understand it than a cellist who's going to fake it on something else and go, yeah, I think that's how that sounds.
And there's something else too, and that is a piano player hears both melodically and harmonically. Mm-hmm. You do. You have to.
Yeah.
It's the music you play.
Yeah.
But a single line instrument, God bless them, they don't hear as harmonically as a pianist does. They hear linearly. They hear their part.
Right.
If you're a flute player, you hear flute parts. You're a violinist, you hear violin parts. Now, if you play in a string quartet, different story. If you play in a string quartet and you're a violinist, you are used to hearing harmonically because you need to tune to the other three members all the time. Different story. But in the orchestra, you're a horn player. Hey, listen, it's enough just to be able to make a freaking sound in that little teeny mouthpiece they have and to start a pitch without blowing a fluff, at the beginning. I mean, these instruments are so hard to play. It's enough to execute your part.
Especially when you said the oboist. I think that's really probably the toughest one to come from, because to me that's the deepest. And I don't play the oboe. I don't play a double reeded instrument, but just by nature of it being a double reeded instrument, to me is the one that requires the most specialty.
I think the French horn is the most difficult orchestral instrument, followed by the oboe.
But it's because of the flexibility of the notes that those things play, right? Like,
well,
you can really miss something.
It's these double reeds
Right.
on the oboe. I mean, just to make a squeak
Yeah.
on a double reed could take you months. So again, here's a good question to ask. What kind of person wants to spend his or her life with an instrument that required them to spend the first year just trying to make a sound?
Yeah.
Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero.
Hey, and this is Pete Turner.
And if you like the show,
Do us a favor.
share it.
That's the biggest thing, honestly.
All your social media outlets, all your friends, let them know the ones that you like.
Yeah. I mean, we make this show for you guys. If you think it's great, say so. Say so by sharing it. Say so by putting a comment in after the show.
Also, if you go to iTunes or Stitcher or wherever you listen to podcasts, give us a rating, give us a review. If you think the show is great, please give us 5 stars and say so. And if you think the show really sucks, please give us 5 stars and say so.
Because, heck, we're listening.
That's right.
You can't be more approachable than us. We want to make the show better. If there's something that we're missing, let us know. That really is how you help us.
That's right. Tell us all about it. Thanks for listening.
And now back to the show.
I know I would have taken that and I would have crushed it under my heel within the first week. I would have said, no chance.
Right.
First,
And
and then
my instrument with a stick.
and then an instrument that requires you to make your own reeds. So you sit there with a little X-Acto knife carving your reeds because you can't buy oboe reeds. You have to
Right.
make them yourself.
Yeah.
Then an instrument that also causes migraine headaches because of the pressure it builds up on your nasal cavities playing it, causes tremendous migraines. What kind of person is willing to dedicate
Let's
her
review.
life to an instrument like that? Well,
A year to make a squeak, an ungodly squeak.
Right.
And then you must master that squeak.
and then you have to make your own reeds and you have to deal with the migraines. I'm sorry. You know what? I appreciate what you do. I do not want to date you.
And the French horn is harder.
And the French horn is just to play by far the most difficult instrument in the orchestra because it's got that tiny little mouthpiece.
Yeah.
And your embouchure, I mean, you have to be able to basically, bend nails with your tongue and your lips. It's a very tough
Which
instrument.
makes you popular around prom time.
Yes, it does. It does. And look, you could change a tire and never use your hands.
Right.
But again, only certain kinds of people. I mean, it's true in everything we do. It's amazing. We're all so different and everyone has his or her own skill set and our skill sets bring us into different jobs. And if we're really lucky, and this is lucky, if we're really lucky, we find a life that exploits our skill set as best as it can be exploited. To me, that's as close to happiness professionally as we can get. Whatever we're doing, we can use those things we kind of do best in doing it. And so when you look at the instruments of the orchestra, for example, it is amazing how different people are based on the instrument they play because all the instruments require such a different skill set.
This is maybe a layman's question, but I'm going to ask it, and partly because I have a question about my dad, and he played. So I always say my dad played the piano, and he played the organ,
Mm-hmm.
particularly the church organ.
Right.
And if you've seen a church organ, it might have 5 stacks of keyboards.
Right. Manuals, 5 manuals.
Yeah, 5 manuals,
Right.
and maybe
And then a pedal manual.
pedal manual, and then 200 options on
Stops.
top for switches.
All
and
the stops.
And then what do you call the buttons across the bottom? The silver ones that you kick for the pedals to make them change.
Right. More stops.
More stops.
I mean, that's when they say pull out all the stops
Right.
means to make the maximum amount of noise you can possibly make.
Right. So being able to play a pipe organ and a piano, is that truly
That just blew my
oh.
mind. I'm going to interject that. That blew my mind.
What's
Pulling
that?
out all the stops.
That's what it means. It's
Yeah.
an organ.
I get that.
Pulling out all the stops means engaging all
Everything
the
you've
pipes
got.
in an
Let
organ.
it all run.
there's even the buttons on the manuals in front of
Yes.
them.
Yes.
I mean, there's obviously in the Casio keyboard, that's all a couple of buttons here and there now. But to master and play the pipe organ well,
You think about a pipe organ. It's a one-person orchestra.
right?
They talk about these different ranks of pipes as being equivalent to different instruments. This rank of pipes, this set of 40 pipes, let's say, create trumpet sounds.
Right.
This set of 40 pipes has double, or 20 pipes has double reeds in them, so they create oboe sounds. I mean, these big organs are orchestras. And again, the more of these stops you pull out, the more air is engaged to more ranks of pipes. So yeah, if you engage all the ranks of pipes, you get maximum sound.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Were you going to ask what character trait about your dad?
No, he was going to ask, is there a difference between playing the piano
Yeah,
and
can
playing
all
the
piano
organ?
players play that?
No, absolutely not.
So the pipe organ requires a specific skill set.
Correct.
Maybe
Yes.
similar, but
And a
Well,
different point of view.
different-
Because
yes.
a percussionist who plays the snare drum is a lot different in point of view than the timpanist.
Yes. And I think that's exactly it. The pipe organ, the piano, you got one keyboard, you got 3 pedals max,
yeah, right.
of which we really only use the one on the right most of the time. It's
I don't know what the other two do.
well,
One vibrates the seat. Feels real nice.
oh, I wish I had that one.
Yeah.
Excuse me, what kind of piano are you playing?
the best.
A Sexway.
Yes.
That one that killed the dude.
Yeah, right.
With a smile on his face.
Yeah. The left-hand pedal in a grand piano shifts the keyboard over about 1/8 of an inch. And so when you play a note, when you hit a lever, instead of striking 2 or 3 strings, it only strikes 1. So it's called the soft pedal. It creates a much softer sound.
Soft pedaling.
And then the middle pedal is called the sostenuto pedal. And I can demonstrate for you, but I won't right now. But what happens when you push this, if you hold a note down, press the middle pedal down, the sostenuto pedal, and then pick up your hands, just those strings, the dampers on those strings stay up. So you can keep playing, but you'll have certain open strings now on the piano, which will continue to vibrate, which won't be damped. And that's very handy. For example, let's say you're playing.
Now you're playing the pipe organ with your hands.
Well, if you're playing a piece of music.
Bagpipes.
If you're playing a piece of music that has a very low note, and you need that note to sustain through for the next, the next 15 seconds. Sure. But meanwhile, you have to have both hands back up. You hit that note, you put down the sostenuto, then you keep playing. It holds that note for you. But the pipe organ is an entirely different instrument. Yes, it's got a keyboard, and yes, your physical dexterity is there. But first of all, it's not a dynamically sensitive keyboard.
Right.
So it doesn't matter how hard you hit the key. And if you're a piano player, you're used to being able to sing at the keyboard. The pipe organ has, aside from the multiple manuals, it's got that darn foot keyboard, a full chromatic keyboard for your feet. And these organists wear these little slippers that they wear. And they do the most amazing things.
That's right.
I mean, their feet fly around. To me, that's really freaky to me. I mean, I look at their feet and I say, that's all wrong.
Yeah.
That's all wrong. That's like looking at these gibbon monkeys climbing trees, and using their feet and their hands. And going, I'm sorry. Do you have 4 legs or 4 arms?
That's right.
I can't tell.
Yeah.
Well, that's what organists
You're peeling bananas, breaking open bananas, knocking around coconuts, scratching your red behind,
and
all
having
at the same
sex
time.
all at the same time.
Yeah.
Exactly. Dude, choose an activity, okay, and run with it.
Yeah.
The other thing, and then on top of that,
be like the sostenuto or the sausage noodle. That's how
it's going to leave a mark. And then on top of that, an organist is constantly reorchestrating the organ by pulling out and closing stops, and orchestrally changing the sound of a piece of music. So a passage might be played, and let's say there's a repeat of that passage. The organist is going to immediately reorchestrate that so that the passage repetition might be quieter and more oboe-like or more bassoon-like, whatever. It's a totally different gig. And to me, as a piano player, it's a stunningly awesome gig, what organists do. They're really creating the world from scratch. And one more thing I would add to this, because it's something we need to appreciate. These magnificent pipe organs that were being built and promulgated across Europe in the 1600s, this was, along with watchmaking, the ultimate technology of the 17th century.
Yeah.
The ultimate technology, watchmaking and organ building. To this day, we walk into a great cathedral or into a big room where a big organ is playing. And to this day, we are awed and stunned by the sound.
That's true.
Can you imagine in 1650?
What it would have been like.
What it would have been like to walk into it, where there was no grandiosity whatsoever in a culture except in that church, where you had a 80-foot ceiling.
No wonder Jesus was a hit.
Oh my goodness. I mean, you want to talk about power and a thrill. And if you're an organist, someone like J.S. Bach, or even better, folks don't know this. The young Louis van Beethoven, I call him Louis because his friends called him Louis. Ludwig is his German name. His first gig was as the organist for the electoral court in Bonn, in his hometown. That was his first paying gig. He was an organist. Yeah, he played harpsichord and piano, but he got his chops playing organ. Here's a kid who had no control over any other aspect of his life. His father was an alcoholic, beat him up all the time. His mother was sickly. He was the oldest of 3 boys. He had to take care of his brothers. And now he gets to play this big freaking pipe organ. Actually, there were 2 big freaking pipe organs he could play in the main church and in the electoral chapel. It gave him control. It gave him power. Can you imagine feeling that power as a kid, otherwise disempowered? No
There's
wonder.
nothing else you'd want to do ever.
And so no wonder this guy obliterated every piano where he ever touched.
Yeah.
He was always looking for the organ sound.
Right.
You know, and he was got famous as a pianist 10 years later when he moved to Vienna. And he was famous for destroying those little lightweight pianos that existed.
They couldn't handle him.
He wanted the piano to sound like an organ.
Yeah.
Can't blame
And
him.
he had to beat the shit out of it.
He had to. He had to get whatever he could get out of them. So, you know, these organs, the organ has in many ways defined a lot of wonderful musicians and defined a lot of music. And I think Beethoven's orchestration is based on his experience as an organist. And I think that's true with a lot of composers.
Sure. It colored his voice, just
Absolutely.
like you were talking about.
It's
It
what he
goes back
heard,
to the
what he
beginning.
heard in his inner ear.
And the way that he organized the world.
You're also mastering an instrument, especially in the pipe organ world, and like going back to the composers coming from the keyboard area, they are working with the concert level approach. They got everything there. They're doing all the different parts, like you said, whereas the violinist is just becoming perfect at doing the violin. Like I've already know the violin part because I play that with my left hand, then I push this button over here and I flip this.
Right.
So that's what they're thinking in that way. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, an organist has to think orchestrally, whereas a violinist is not just playing one part, but at least after 1805 or 1810, having to follow a conductor, not being allowed to make interpretive decisions herself. And, you know, this is always a funny thing with modern orchestras. Bach's orchestral music, because the orchestras were small, 16 to 20 max people. There was
That's a cocktail party.
well, there was no such thing as a conductor in those days.
Yeah.
You didn't need a conductor. You just needed a traffic cop, someone to start you and stop you, right? So that would have been the harpsichord player or first violinist, and you'd start and stop. And that was true in Mozart's symphonies. You just needed someone to start and stop you. Haydn symphonies. It wasn't until Beethoven you needed an exterior interpreter like a conductor. But once you have that, so here's the funny thing about players. They bitch about conductors all the time. We don't need that conductor. We could play without him. But you know what? You can't. You've spent your whole life following conductors, dude. Maybe 200 years ago you could have played without a conductor. Can't do it anymore because you're so used to following. So this is a bit of a conundrum. The players dislike the conductors. We could do without you, but
Also, the size of an orchestra. And before we get too far away from it, I just want to acknowledge that I had a girlfriend who could reorchestrate an organ. God bless her.
reorchestrate.
But you only
organ?
want to do that once or twice in your life.
Excuse me. I assume we're not talking about more than one pipe.
Yeah, the single pipe organ, right?
That's right. The other
Yeah, we should
thing that I
mention
have to
Brenna's
say,
in the house.
Yes, exactly.
She's got a
Exactly.
pretty thick skin.
Pete's. Well, of course, she's Pete's daughter.
She's Pete's daughter. Right. And,
But it doesn't mean we're not being inappropriate boys. Excuse me.
well, that's true.
I love that.
You know, and I want to say that Brenna has a member to whom she refers as Tan Marino because she keeps it tanned. Anyway,
Tan Marino?
also polished. The other
Brenna
thing
has
I
an
want to say,
imaginary penis. It's
is-
big and veiny, and its name is Tan Marino. The world now knows.
Lucky you.
yeah,
How do I get one of those?
luckier than I.
We have a name for
I
it.
know.
George Hamilton. You can jump right on
right.
into the tan party.
Right.
The other thing that I wanted to say, given the Beethoven story,
Well, that
is
explains why George Washington was the father of our country.
That's
Yeah,
right.
that's
Never
right.
mind. I'm sorry, John.
He
You
didn't-
go ahead.
Right. And he didn't necessarily chop down a child.
No, exactly.
So the other thing is that we've probably all been too kind to our children because it seems like everybody who has achieved greatness was either lost their mother at a very young age or had a father who was a real son of a bitch.
Don't point at me for.
So I guess Brenna's destined for success.
I want to punch you in the face.
Where would Beethoven have been had he had a softer life?
This is always everyone's question, isn't it? If he hadn't lost his hearing, if he hadn't slowly gone deaf between 1796 and 1818, 22 years it took for him to go deaf.
Yeah.
He didn't have IBS.
Crohn's disease and all kinds of irritable bowel syndrome.
Yeah.
Don't you know it?
Didn't you teach me?
Who can know? Although I will say that, for example, I'm doing a lecture series right now in San Francisco on Dmitri Shostakovich, and along with the Alexander String Quartet. And here's a guy who grew up in a very happy household with a wonderful family, 2 loving sisters who were anchors of support for him throughout his life, a mother who adored him, a father who adored him. Okay.
And he did it.
Unfortunately, he did it. He had to live in the Soviet Union, which, of course, crapped him up.
Yeah.
But it wasn't the family that ruined him. We all there's no one who gets through life unscathed. Ozzie and Harriet notwithstanding, there's no one who gets through life unscathed. Everyone has a torch to carry. Yeah. Everyone has something.
Ozzie and Harriet had to bury a child, did they not?
Did they? Well, I'm talking about the TV version.
The TV, yeah.
Because this was the crap that I grew up watching. There's this perfect family bullshit that we all experienced. And therefore we all wonder, because having lost my mom at a young age when I was not quite 7 years old, you look around and everyone else seems perfect because that was the message that was sent. But in reality,
as if you're the only one who was not.
In reality, everybody has a story to tell. This is one of the great realizations of my adulthood.
Yeah.
Everybody has a story or 5 stories to tell. And the very few people who get through unscathed, can I say bad words?
Yeah.
Fuck them. You know what? God bless you. I don't want to talk to you because you don't have any clue.
Right.
You don't have a clue.
Yeah.
If you've gotten through unscathed,
whatever you have to say is of no consequence.
You
quit lying.
You don't have a clue.
And quit lying.
Yeah. And quit lying. And so
the guy who got through unscathed, his left ball didn't drop.
Right.
Uh-huh.
And again, I don't want to sound judgmental, and I don't mean this to be judgmental. You didn't have a kid? Okay, good for you. God bless you. There's like a million worries and fears and paranoias and monetary issues you never had to deal with. I can't take you seriously.
Yeah.
Oh, now people will tell me, well, Brahms and Beethoven didn't have kids, but they were fucked up. And that's beautiful because I can identify with them as people. They both went through primal disruptions in their life. What else do we build on? Yeah. What else creates personality? No. What else makes us who we are? If we can't fight against something, we're nothing. I'm sorry, I don't mean to get overly passionate about this, but you know what? We are our personal duels. We all have stories.
That's what we're made of.
And if we're not, then I'm not interested in you. And that sounds really harsh, and I don't mean it to.
Yeah. We live in a day and age now where this is Pete's reality and mine is that we will never retire.
I'll retire on my way as I fall.
I was about to say, as they nail down the box, I'll say, okay, I'm done.
Yeah. I'll punch my fist in my heart and go, and I'll be retiring on the way down, and that'll be it. Yeah. That's all right. Sorry to jump in.
No, but that's the reality. I mean, for one thing, we have now an ability to be more physically capable of performing work as we get older, longer in the tooth. And now, hopefully, what we'll experience is that the wisdom that comes with that age, combined with increased physical capability, creates a work that's a lot more seasoned.
I want to know what increased physical capability you are having so I can be jealous.
Well, I'm not saying that my physical capability has increased from when I was younger, but I think that as a generation, we are more capable than the generations previous to us.
And I agree with you. Yeah, we're lucky.
So the people who had to retire when they were 55 or 62
crazy
are now we look at 55 and 62 as well. You know, this is a second win.
What are you going to do next?
Yeah, exactly. You're just a beginner. You've only like figured out the rules by the time you're 60, and I mean that sincerely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
You figured out the rules. Okay, now I see how to play the game.
Right.
Maybe.
Do you think that, and I'm assuming that we're going to be much more productive and much more, because we have been, as our lifespans have grown longer,
Right.
the technology curve has moved a lot faster. And I don't think that's a coincidence. Or I don't think that's accidental. They do coincide, but I don't think it's an accident. So, do you think that composition is going to get more complicated? And I mean that in the best sense. Not complicated in terms of, gratuitous complication, but are we going to get better at it?
I don't know what better. I hear what you're saying, and I think I know where it's coming from, but I don't think the word better means anything to me. Certainly, if we want to talk about complicated simply in terms of complexity, which you said was not what you meant, but complexity for its own sake means losing your audience. If all a composer wants to do is build more material into a piece of music, there's a point of perception death where people can't perceive what's going on. If we're talking about folks living longer and being maybe having a little more of that wisdom that comes with age and being able to build somehow certain depths of understanding into their music, it will be very interesting to start seeing what happens in the next couple of generations of composers. People who don't just, again, you look at Beethoven, who wrote these extraordinary. We have to remember Beethoven died at 56.
Right.
And we talk about late Beethoven. We talk about late Mozart. Late Mozart is when he was 35.
Yeah.
Excuse me. So what will composers do who can live longer and have a greater life experience? I'm hoping, and I'm assuming, based on current trends in concert music, that we will be creating ever more music that is accessible to a larger audience, which has been happening now for the last 20 years. I mean, I happen to think my music is accessible to a larger audience, but a lot of people might disabuse me of that, having heard that. What is that modern crap? No, that's like Giant Steps by John Coltrane. It's not, I don't like that shit either. Oh, duh, dude. So that's the other thing. You talk to a composer about his or her music.
Right.
Their ideas of what they think their music is so entirely different about what someone else. But if what you're talking about is us living longer and keeping our bodies healthy longer, and as a result having a longer worldview, yes, it will be very interesting to see what kind of music people produce.
I mean, if Beethoven was born today, he wouldn't have to suffer as much. You would hope. I mean, he may suffer in different ways.
Well, let's say Beethoven did suffer. His hearing, by the way, would never have been an issue.
Right.
That could have been fixed right away.
Yeah.
Outpatient surgery.
Yeah.
Well, Beethoven's pain was our gain, so it wouldn't have been the same Beethoven.
Right.
It wouldn't have been the same Beethoven. And, here's a case where, like I say, his suffering has helped humanity. There's other people where that's happened to, too. I mean, like Mother Teresa. What if Mother Teresa, God bless her, what if Mother Teresa had been born in some rich French family?
Right.
I mean, her
Who would
life
have furthered what she furthered?
Yeah. I mean, these are looking at historical models and speculating what would happen. I mean, it's a little scary, isn't it? I mean, Mozart, my goodness, a couple of doses of antibiotics and Mozart would have been fine. A couple of doses of antibiotics, Mahler would have been fine.
But Mozart, like you said, same thing with Beethoven. Mozart wouldn't have been on the road as a 6-year-old going from kingdom to kingdom.
That's true.
He might have been on the road and doing something at Disney or something, but, the amount
It's Sullivan, right.
Yeah. So out there doing some, maybe.
Screwing whores.
What? So, okay.
And what are you supposed to do with them otherwise?
They need work.
Make
You know
them
what we don't
martinis?
do often enough, and I'm going to do it now. RobertGreenbergMusic.com. Everybody go visit the website, and we
yes.
need to do this at the very beginning of the show as well, so I'll cut it in. go visit robertgreenbergmusic.com to find out what Dr. Bob is up to. If you're a loyal listener to the show, you've heard Dr. Bob and you know how much we love him, and you've heard him several times, and you'll hear him several times more because we're going to capture him as often as he allows us to, all the way until he's making music at 180. So,
But I'm not sure I want to do this without Brenna. And she's going back to Georgia.
We're
She
going to have
is.
her back in the summer, though.
All right.
yeah, and we'll get her back.
All right. Okay.
Her and Tan Marino.
You know what? I might need to see the Dan Marino, but just out of intellectual curiosity.
That's right. Yeah, completely on an issue. She unfurls it.
Unrolls it.
That's right.
And rolls
So
it
not
back
only
up.
should you go visit robertgreenbergmusic.com.
Problem is, the brain can be injurious. Just be careful that you're lying down. Just, as a guy that has suffered the same issues, right?
It's like circular breathing, Dr. Bob. She's nurtured a gift to move the blood around and allow the organs that are without it at the moment
to do without and then to recover.
and to recover. That's
So
right.
Tan Marino's like her own little personal didgeridoo.
That's right. That's right.
Now, why Tan Marino? Why not Elway's John?
Because she wants to tan it. Yeah, it's tan
Yeah.
and veiny.
She has a tiny tanning bed.
Oh, a tanning bed.
Yeah, it was custom built,
Yeah.
purpose built, let's say. It's concave.
Does it have a foreskin or not?
It has a 5 skin. It's got such an impressive foreskin.
It's got a
like
smegma bar.
It's like a bag of beef
Yeah, I
jerky.
was going to say a smegma bomb is bad news.
Yeah.
And it's just like cream cheese on a bagel. You don't want to go there.
You know when you go to Costco and there's that enormous bag of beef jerky?
Yeah.
Anyway, so Robert
I'm
Greenberg.
thinking of Rasputin's penis, supposedly, that's been preserved
Right.
in that museum in St. Petersburg,
Yes.
the sex museum,
Since we've digressed to this
which is
topic,
actually apparently a rutabaga.
it's a rutabaga.
It's a post-it.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Kenny
Anyway,
G.
we'll stop now.
Have you
Actually,
guys
no.
heard the rumor of Kenny G?
That he's swinging?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't.
Swinging what?
Something impressive.
More than one.
Yeah,
soprano.
him and Liam Neeson. You know what? I know someone who's dated Liam Neeson,
Yeah.
and she said,
Not so much.
I want to ask you a music question.
Milton Berle.
Milton Berle, famous.
Yeah.
Others would pull out their dicks and say, how about this? And Milton would only pull out enough to show he was bigger,
Yeah.
but never pull out the whole thing.
Right.
He'd say, I don't need to pull out the whole
No. Only enough to win.
Only enough to win.
Yeah.
Classic. And a Jewish guy, too.
Yep.
Who would think?
How about it?
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Well,
The extra.
welcome to the Brotherhood. Thank
Someone's
you, dude.
got to be at the front end of the bell curve.
Don't you?
The
This compensation for the face. But, okay. I could be wrong, but I'm just thinking.
His bris was the reason the Sawzall was invented. Anyway. Moving on.
the plasma cutter.
Yeah.
I want to ask a question about music. So pipe organs, once again, a very, very old instrument, but still around. But the need for faith is waning as a society. If you walk into a church that's got a pipe organ, or you walk into a church that's got an electric organ, there's no competition. One is way better than the other. Are we going to lose the pipe organ, though?
No, absolutely not.
Where do they...
It's going to have a different power, though. It's not going to have the power that it... Because now, when we want that power, we go to a large concert. We go see U2.
Yeah.
Because that's where that...
You know what? I'm very naive, and I'm going to share my naivete with you. You guys are younger and God knows more tuned to what are likely to be the trends of the near to mid future.
Also more Milton Berle-like. If I
No,
may be so presumptuous.
Speak for yourself. I can unroll myself as well.
You heard it here first, ladies
I've
and
got
gentlemen.
my Fran Tarkington. Thank you very much.
Dan Tarkington.
That's not on robertgreenbergmusic.com,
Yes.
but
indeed.
go there anyway.
The pipe organ is a magnificent instrument. Europe is filled. The United States is filled. Every cathedral has an amazing, and large church has an amazing pipe organ. Okay, in the olden days, in Bach's day, these organs were powered by human power. That is, people operating bellows themselves. They've all been electric for years. They've all been rebuilt. Nothing's happening to these organs. They're all over the Western world. In addition to that, all the major concert halls have magnificent organs. The San Francisco Symphony in Davies Hall has a Ruffati, an organ built by an Italian gent named Ruffati, that is just freaking amazing. There is this extraordinary repertoire going back to the early 1600s, late 1500s, and moving all the way through the 20th, and I would say hazard the early 21st century of organ music. It is a repertoire that will never be abandoned. It's too inspirational. It's too beautiful. It's too magnificent. We needn't worry about the loss of this repertoire. We needn't worry about the loss of these organs. They are there. Major universities have beautiful pipe organs. It's an incredible instrument, and it will survive, and the repertoire that you play on it will survive, because the repertoire is life-enhancing and is essential to who and what we are.
And like the watch has survived, that piece of technology.
Correct. Okay,
is
it's not the supreme technology it was in the 17th century, but that doesn't matter.
No, it deserves tribute.
And it's not even tribute. It's still contemporary in that the music, when it's played, is utterly contemporary.
Yeah.
You know, I'm a believer. I sit down, I listen to, who doesn't love Johann Sebastian Bach? And who doesn't love his organ music? I'm sorry, if you don't love Bach's organ music, you either have not heard it, or you have a heart smaller than Ricky Henderson's Strike Zone.
To bring it back to the Oakland
To
Hills.
bring it back to the
Spoken like an
Oakland,
Oaklander.
exactly, spoken like an Oaklander. This is eternal music. It's not limited by its time and place.
Right.
Its power, its beauty, its magnificence are eternal, and it crosses the lines of time and culture and geography. And God knows if there are other life forms in our galaxy, sooner or later they will hear Bach and they will go, whoa, good earth, dude.
Yeah.
Because it's so amazing. No, we're not going to lose this stuff. We're not going to lose it in the near future. We're not going to lose it in the distant future. This is not stupidity on my part. It's simply logic. We haven't lost Aristotle. We haven't lost Sophocles. We haven't lost the Bible. We haven't lost the great written accomplishments. I mean, okay, granted, we're still a fairly fresh technological species. I mean, if you date human culture to the invention of writing, which was 5,000 years ago, we're still a brand new techno species. And if you date digital technology, well, we're just starting to enter our true technological culture. So we're still a brand new entity. But the classics will last. And I think that's important to realize. You know, we forget how young we are as a species, how young we are as a technology, how new we are as a coherent element in biological time. Really, we're really at just the very beginning of who and what we are as a technology, as a people. Because our records only go back 5,000 years. That's just tiny.
And that's what shows how really young we are.
Yeah,
is that we lose sight of how young we are.
We're babies. The Homo sapiens are babies. And providing we're not so stupid as to destroy the environment that sustains us, you know, which is really important that we remember. It shows our childhood, doesn't it? It shows our essential ignorance and childishness when we fight about the environment, when we fight about global warming, when we fight about the ramifications of our actions in destroying other species. It really shows how stupid we are. We need to learn. We need to coexist. We need to create a happier environment for everything that lives. I hope, I pray, that in 500 or 1,000 years, we've smartened up enough not to destroy everything around us, and that our localized ignorance has left, and that we take a kind of larger view of our own existence and that of the animals and creatures and biosphere around us. But the bottom line is we're still brand new. Look back 100 years, look back 150 years ago, there was no germ theory. People were dying constantly. I mean, it's still to this day, people are dying constantly, but it's amazing. We're on the very cusp of the beginnings of civility today.
Yeah.
Really.
Our guest this week, a man reputed to have a magnificent organ that is itself surrounded by human beings operating bellows.
Pipe organ.
Dr. Bob Greenberg.
Before you started talking about Bach and the pipe organ, playing in my head was Bach on the pipe organ. You know, all that you know the tune better than I do, but you're right. And we're still young enough. Still, so many of us we've forgotten a lot of our history, even though it's available. I mean, I would encourage anybody, you don't have to believe in God. You go into that cathedral and you have someone play that Bach song, and I'm going to quote English Bob, and you will stand in awe. You can't help but feel Bach.
Listen, there are things in our world, and bless us, that open us up to divine influence. I don't care what divine influence means to you. There is a divinity at some profound level. I'm not talking about necessarily religious divinity, that you can choose. But there's a higher level we can all go to, one that allows us to unite ourselves to each other. To me, that's the ultimate divinity, isn't it? Isn't it? Is the love we have for each other and the care we have for each other, our families, our friends, our world, and our shared concern for each other's well-being. And that shared concern applies to our planet. It applies to the animals we live with. It applies to the bacteria that populate the tartar on our teeth. It applies to everything, because we're no better than all the things that allow us to live on this wonderful planet. And we need to mature. That I do believe. But part of that maturation process is appreciating the best of what we are. And the best of what we are is often exhibited in our music.